I remember that horrifying and terrifying night very well. My name is Carla. That night I was a passenger on a bus traveling along a road through the mountains in Mexico. The bus was nearly full. This happened over 10 years ago, but it still sends chills down my spine whenever I think about what happened to us. It was just about 9 p.m. I remember that a movie the driver had put on had just ended, and he turned off the TVs to play some music instead. It was common back then for buses to play music when they weren't showing movies on those little TVs. Everything was normal until around 11 p.m., as we were making our way up the mountain. Some people had already fallen asleep, but I was awake because I had my 4-year-old son with me, and I couldn't sleep as I needed to watch over him. The music was playing while I stared out into the impending darkness outside. Suddenly, a very loud noise came through the speakers, like when something causes interference, but it was so loud that many people woke up, including my son. And then, something terrible started to come through the speakers. It was the voice of a woman screaming for help, followed by many desperate cries and unintelligible words because of the intensity of her shrieks, melancholic, almost like a scene from a horror movie. We immediately knew there was something sinister in that recording, and it was real, because the woman gave her location. She mentioned a mile marker on that same mountain, and from what little she could make out, she said that an armed group had attacked her while she was in her truck. The bus driver tried to turn down the volume so we wouldn't hear, but he couldn't. He apologized to us and said he didn't understand what was happening. The woman continued to scream and sob uncontrollably, ending with the phrase, "Don't come this way." After that, the music resumed as if nothing had happened. We were all very scared and alarmed, though we would not be passing through that area. I was terrified, especially since I had my young son with me, who started crying after hearing such a thing, and it was very difficult to calm him down. The bus driver tried to reassure us, telling us to stay calm and that everything was going to be all right, but it was inevitable to feel fear. A few minutes later, we arrived at a bus terminal where some people would get off or on, and we who were continuing the journey had a chance to go to the bathroom. Almost everyone got off, but I stayed behind to talk to the driver because I was very afraid for my son, and the woman's heart-wrenching laments haunted me. He told me he would tell me the truth to calm me down, and I listened attentively. He said it wasn't the first time this had happened, and we were not the only ones who had heard it. It had happened to some of his colleagues too in recent weeks or months while passing through that area. He told me about a woman truck driver a few years ago who had been intercepted by a criminal gang at that mile marker because they mistook her for someone else who was their enemy. They simply made her disappear. Only her truck was found, but no one ever heard from her again. It hadn't been long since this started happening suddenly and without warning on buses and trucks. The radio would interfere, and that would start playing out of nowhere. That's why he was sure nothing bad was going to happen, because it was just the soul of that woman who apparently had her life taken in a very cruel way, and she wants to warn everyone who might pass through there. Hearing that made me very sad, but the fear didn't leave me. On the contrary, I was listening to someone who was no longer alive. It was very traumatic, especially being completely alone in the middle of the mountains in the dark. Hearing that was too much. Even now I get chills when I remember, because her screams were too horrible to hear, full of fear and immense pain, and that is something I would not wish anyone to ever hear. My name is Rene Lopez, and I have worked for a long time as a driver for a transportation company. Many people, upon meeting me and learning about my job, ask if I've ever seen anything paranormal on the highways during my late-night journeys, or if I have any stories of that kind. The answer is yes. Honestly, one exposes oneself to that and many other worse things while traveling at night, especially through Mexican territory. But this particular story is somewhat different, though equally eerie in my opinion. One day I received instructions from my boss about a job driving for a school that had rented one of our buses for a field trip with a small group of students. The trip was going to be 9 hours long, and I was chosen to be the driver. I gladly accepted, so that afternoon I arrived at the school with the bus, as that was our starting point. I remember arriving at the school very early. The students were scheduled to meet at 7 p.m., but I arrived around 6 p.m. to fill out some paperwork and complete all the necessary protocols. As you can imagine, it's a big responsibility transporting minors without their parents, only accompanied by 2 teachers. As I left the school office and was heading to the bus to start it up and cool it down, I noticed a girl already seated by a window on the bus, which I found strange. For starters, I was sure I had locked the door, and besides, the bus was very hot inside since the air conditioning was off and the sun was beaming directly on it. I opened the door and told the girl to please get off and that her teachers would let her know when she and her classmates could board. However, the girl just stared at me and never responded. I had no choice but to speak with one of the teachers about what was happening with the girl, and to make her understand that she had to get off the bus and wait in the schoolyard with the other students who had already arrived. The teacher, visibly annoyed, told me that the trip hadn't even started and they were already being disobedient. So she quickly went to get the girl off the bus, but when we both got on, there was no one there. The teacher checked the bathroom and it was empty too. We thought the girl might have quickly gotten off when she saw that I was fetching one of her teachers, fearing she would be scolded. Time passed, and finally, the students began to board the bus. I was standing at the door with one of the teachers, making sure everyone had their parental permission slips. What was odd was that I never saw the girl, whom I had seen earlier on the bus, get on. When I mentioned it to the teacher, she assured me that everyone was accounted for. It felt strange, but we were running a few minutes late, so I just got on the bus, and we started the journey just past 8 p.m. On the highway, everything was normal for the first few hours, and by midnight, all the young students and teachers were asleep. I was listening to the radio while driving down that dark road when suddenly, something happened. Some girls from the back came up to the front where their teachers were sitting, right behind me, and complained that someone had been pulling their blankets off repeatedly while they slept. They felt someone pull on them, throwing them to the floor, but they couldn't see who it was. One of the teachers got up and went to the back. I don't know exactly what she did, but when she returned, she told the other teacher that the other students were all sound asleep. She had woken up those nearby and in front of the girls, but they had no idea what she was talking about. They denied being the culprits, as they had been sleeping too. That was settled for the moment. About an hour later, the same 2 girls from the back came up again, angry and scared, as they had felt someone pull their hair while they were sleeping. They said that this time they woke up immediately and there were no classmates awake. Everyone was sleeping. One of them even checked the bathroom to see if the prankster was hiding there, but it was completely empty. They asked the teachers to change their seats, but one of the teachers told them it was impossible, as there were no available seats left, and their classmates were asleep. There was only one empty seat by the window in the middle of the bus, but on the other seat next to it was a boy who was also asleep, so the girls resigned themselves and returned to their places. Midway through, we stopped at a gas station with a restaurant and public bathrooms. The teacher woke the students in case anyone wanted to eat or use the bathroom, and they all wanted to stretch their legs. I took the opportunity to use the bathroom as well, but when I returned to the bus, everyone was still at the gas station as they had been given 10 minutes, and only 5 had passed. But as I approached the bus, I saw the same girl again, seated in the seat that had been empty before the break. I could see her clearly. Seeing the girl again surprised me because, as I mentioned earlier, I had never seen her board the bus with the others. So I quickly went up to the bus to ask her how she had gotten in without anyone noticing and where she had been hiding. But as I got on the bus again, the girl was nowhere to be seen. I was feeling somewhat afraid because this was getting too strange, coupled with what I had heard from the other girls about the pranks during the trip, and not being able to see who was responsible. I wanted to talk to the teachers, but they were already coming back with all the students, so I didn't get a chance. Everyone got on and we continued our journey, and it was very late into the night. The young students fell asleep again. The teachers were chatting, but then there was silence, and soon everyone was asleep. And that's when I saw the girl again, walking down the aisle towards the back. So I yelled at her to stop, but then I heard one of the teachers wake up, asking who I was talking to. I told her it was one of her students who was awake, but when we looked, there was no one there. That's when I decided to tell her everything that had happened since before the trip started. The teacher listened attentively, her face a mix of fear and surprise. She pulled out her cell phone, showed me a photo, and asked if it was her. I confirmed that it was the same girl I had been seeing all this time. She covered her mouth in shock and moved next to me to tell me in a low voice what had happened with the girl. She told me that the girl was a student from that group who was very excited about the trip because her parents had signed the authorization and made the payments. But a week before the trip, the girl had been run over while crossing a street and had died instantly. It was a very sad story, but they couldn't cancel the trip as everything was already paid for. I listened in amazement but believed everything she told me because I had seen the girl myself, and she kept disappearing as if by magic. I knew she wasn't alive. The teacher also told me that the girls from the back, the ones who had complained earlier about someone pulling their hair, had bullied her a lot in school. They were considered the popular girls, and the other girl didn't have many friends other than the boy who was sitting alone. That's why I always saw her sitting in that seat next to the boy. We both had chills, and the teacher kept looking back to see if she could see the girl, and also to keep an eye on her students. But we never saw her again. Only on the way back before boarding the bus, a boy shouted a swear word, telling his classmates that he had seen Renata. That was the girl's name, to which everyone started making fun of him. They thought he was just trying to get attention, but the teacher and I looked at each other because, of course, we believed he saw her there, sitting in the same place. I never saw her again, and nothing paranormal happened on the way back because the teacher was very attentive all night and also had a rosary, praying for her and for her eternal rest. Maybe it worked because, as I said, we never saw her again. That's my story. That was the closest I've ever been to a ghost. I work as a chauffeur for a Mexican bus company, and I have over 20 years of experience in this field. Throughout my career, I've encountered many strange events, and I have a particularly eerie story to share. My name is Jose Luis, and the incident I'm about to recount happened when I was still a novice. It was during my early years as a bus driver, and was an experience that left a profound impact on me due to the fear and trauma it caused. One night I was driving a few passengers from Mexico City to Veracruz. Though I don't recall the exact time, I know it was well past midnight. We were on a highway when we encountered a severe traffic jam caused by a major accident, which had completely stopped traffic. We were right beside an exit, and my co-worker suggested we take it. He recommended an alternate route that was slightly longer, but promised to be much quicker under the circumstances. Initially, I resisted because our policy is to stick to designated routes, but he reassured me that he had taken this detour before, without any issues, and always reached the planned destination. As the delay was expected to be lengthy, I decided to follow his advice. After all, I was a rookie, and he was seasoned. So, I let his experience influence my decision, and we diverted onto a road that was supposedly more dangerous according to the signs. That's why the highway was built in the first place. I was nervous and drove with extra caution as it was extremely dark, and the road appeared abandoned. There were no other vehicles in sight, neither ahead of us nor behind. It felt like we were the only ones who had chosen this path, as if on a ghost highway. Deep into the drive, we suddenly noticed something moving in the bushes at a distance. As we approached, it became clear that these were figures emerging from the woods, or so we thought. They looked like people gesturing for help, signaling us to let them board the bus. My colleague told me to ignore them and just keep driving. He insisted that under no circumstances should I stop. Curious, I asked why, pointing out that they might be accident victims needing urgent help. His response chilled me to the bone. He explained that those figures weren't living people. This road was known for being haunted by the souls of those who had died in accidents there and were now trapped. There were many legends about this, but he had never encountered them because he hadn't driven this route at night before. Strangely, no matter how much we advanced, these figures seemed to maintain the same distance from us, as if moving at our speed but directly towards the bus and asking for help. The situation was deeply unsettling, and I was eager to leave, but we were more than an hour away from exiting this area. Suddenly, a woman on the bus stood up and walked to the front to inquire why we had taken this route. She was from Veracruz, a frequent traveler on this route between Mexico City and Veracruz, and was well aware of the road's eerie reputation. She admonished us while visibly shaken, witnessing the silhouettes begging for help, crossing herself and trembling. She warned us that if anything happened, it would be on us. I was incredibly anxious, not just because of the paranormal activity, but also because I knew she might report us to the company, possibly leading to our dismissal. Eventually, we passed that stretch and the figures simply dissolved into the darkness. I was more than just nervous. I was shaking and in disbelief over what I had seen. I couldn't wait to get home and share the ordeal with my wife, who relishes such paranormal tales. Thankfully, the woman didn't seem to lodge any complaint, as neither my colleague nor I faced any repercussions. But I made a firm decision, never to take that route again. Good evening to everyone, my name is Oscar, and I want to share this anecdote that occurred in the early 2000s while I was traveling from Guerrero to Mexico City on a bus. We left around 9 at night. The bus wasn't full, but there was a considerable number of passengers. I took the second seat from the front, meaning I was almost at the front and on the window side. We started the journey very calmly. I was going to visit my parents, whom I hadn't seen for many months. Well into the road and night, I don't know exactly at which stretch, but suddenly the bus started to sway. I remember I was sleeping and woke up abruptly, just like many other passengers who, like me, were very scared. The driver managed to stop the bus so that it didn't end in tragedy, and we ended up on the side of the road, narrowly avoiding crashing into the bush. The driver told us not to worry, that everything was fine now, but he didn't know what had happened. It seemed like one of the tires had burst, which is why he lost control for a few seconds, and the bus swayed like that, but he would call for help and go down to check the bus. We all stayed seated. I was honestly a bit annoyed since this would delay us even more in getting to our destination, but there was nothing to do but wait. As I was on the window on the right side, I could see the driver get out and check one of the tires. I wasn't watching him all the time. I simply closed my eyes, hoping it wasn't anything serious and that we could leave soon. I remember more people from that side were leaning out to try and see what was happening, but very little could be seen because of the darkness and the bush with the tall grass near where the driver was checking the tire. In fact, I was nervous that some animal might bite him or something like that. One of those times I looked back at the driver. He was already standing up and barely heading to the bus entrance, but in a matter of seconds, something, I can't tell you what it was, grabbed him by the calf and pulled him towards the bush, taking him down in an instant and dragging him out of everyone's sight. I was stunned, did not react at the moment and did not say anything, only hearing some ladies screaming that something had taken the driver. While all the passengers from the other side ran to our windows to see what those ladies were talking about, I turned around and saw everyone looking out the windows, pressed against each other to be able to see, and the ladies explained everything they had seen, not knowing how to tell the other people what thing had grabbed the driver. But I did manage to see for a second that thing. It was a hand like that of a human, but with a lot of hair like animals have, which was why I was in shock. I did not want to say anything because maybe they would think I was crazy. I just confirmed that I had also seen how they pulled him, but that was it. The male passengers decided to get off together to help the driver. Of course, I joined them, and we were about 5 men who got off the bus very carefully. One of them was carrying a small flashlight. Back then, it was not common to have a cell phone, and those that existed did not have a flashlight function, much less. So we only counted on that little lamp from that gentleman who got in front of us to light the way, while others moved the grass with their hands or with branches. We all yelled at the driver asking where he was, but there was never any response or trace of him. We did not want to venture further into the bush because we did not want to put ourselves at risk either. So we decided to get back on the bus and wait for help. Very few cars passed by at those late hours. Some ladies were crying out of fear and uncertainty. The tension inside the bus could be felt as we were all completely vulnerable to anything. We found ourselves stranded in a place where something had taken the driver out of nowhere, and we didn't even know what it was. 2 hours later, the units finally arrived. They moved us to another bus to take us to our destination, and the police stayed there searching for the driver, armed and ready for anything. After that, we left and reached Mexico City without knowing what had happened. But what we did know was that they never found the driver. They only found a shoe that his wife later confirmed was his, but there was no trace of him. Although the whole area was searched by dogs and police, they never managed to find that poor man. Before you think badly of me, I did tell an officer what I saw. But from his look, I knew he did not believe me, and I could not do anything else because I knew it was something hard to believe. Always avoid entering the bush even if you need to relieve yourself, especially at night, since we really do not know everything that might inhabit those very lonely places at night. I tell this story with much respect for the family of that man, a victim of something unknown.